This time on Low Buck Garage, I fixed things with fire.
That works nicely.
I overcharged my battery.
That's way too much.
I admire the fluids.
Doesn't look like a milkshake.
And then this happens. On our last episode, I got this miscellaneous pile of Chevy truck parts rolling and on the road. Let's pick up from there.
Now I got a test right in. It's time for some fresh oil. That wasn't tight at all. Huh. That's a little black. At least this engine has just oil in it, not whatever the other one had. I recently read an article about why you shouldn't use diesel oil in a gasoline engine. And this article basically said that you shouldn't use the diesel oil because it's not suited for high RPM use, and at the high RPM a gas engine sees, it's going to start foaming up. And seeing how this motor is probably never going to go over 3,500 RPM, I think diesel oil is just fine. I found out the reason why this drain plug was surprisingly loose. You can't tighten it. I tightened a bit, I filled it with fresh oil, and then a little bit later I noticed a drip. So I tried to tighten a little more, and it started loosening. And then it tightened, then it loosened, then it tightened, and I have the original pan for this truck, which is a much bigger capacity. So I'd like to change out the entire pan rather than fix this one. But I don't want to drain the oil until I need to drain the oil. So I just need this plug to stay together long enough to use up this batch of oil and need to change it again. I just need to seal that. I don't need to really make it work. If you like fixing cars properly, you might want to close your eyes for this one. Perfect. I'm sure that'll work fine. I think my wiring's all done. I got it roughly buttoned up. I think I'm going to go for the dashboard with gauges now in this spot. I like that brown leather paint I used on the grill, so I went ahead and did the dash piece with that. I've had this old set of Stuart Warner gauges sitting in my shed for a long time. I'm going to put them in and see what we got. Well, I've got the temperature and the oil pressure gauge installed. Now, in order to feed from the engine to the gauge, I found some old copper tubing, and I wrapped it in a coil here for two reasons. First off, anytime you have hand-formed coils of copper tubing, you just think still. And that's just good, wholesome nostalgia. The secondary reason is the gauge is mounted to the body, the engine can vibrate, the coil will actually absorb some of the vibration so you don't flex the tubing as much. Now let's see if it works. I'm going to take a different kind of crack at the windshields here and try to remove it and fix it. Looks like it just bolts on a hinge right there with two screws. I soaked them a couple of days ago in penetrating oil to make it easier. Looks like we just have screws that hold the frame together. So when I take those apart, I should be able to get this glass out. Two screws came out, two screws snapped, and the rest stripped their heads. So I'm just drilling them out. There we go. There we go. Hopefully this will come apart now. Now, there's 4 bolts that hold this windshield to the hinges. 2 came out, 2 snapped off. Luckily, the 2 that snapped off left a stub sticking out. So before I go to drilling it out and retapping it, I'm going to try the heating and penetrating oil method, see if I can actually extract those. Now, my level of fire is indicating it might be hot enough. So I'm going to try hitting with oil and see if I can create more fire. Yep. That works nicely. Oh, looks like the fire and oil technique worked. I'm going to pop off the valve cover for 2 reasons. First, I want to check the valves, make sure I have adequate clearance, because I believe these are mechanical lifters, and if there's not enough clearance, it could hold the valve open and that could burn the valve up. The other thing is I'm noticing this valve cover has these little indentations here that look like it's cut out. I'm wondering if those go straight through, so I want to take a look at them. When you do this, some valves are down, some are up. The lash is only right when the valves are all the way up. Now to keep it straight, I've got this intake valve, which looks good. Just mark a line down it, and that way you know you've adjusted it and you know if it ever moves. And once all of them have a paint mark, they're done. All right, now I'm going to bump the starter. Now we should be in a new position. Don't know what it is, but it doesn't really matter. This intake valve's tight now, which means one of the other ones isn't. Now you're supposed to set these hot. I'm not doing that. I'm setting them cold. So you have to add a little bit to the measurement you have in order to make sure when it heats up and expands, you get the right number. I'll check it again at some point, but I should be good enough for now. Now a couple of these exhaust valves are on the tight side, so I'm going to adjust those out and make sure they have plenty of clearance. Now as a general rule of thumb, if a motor's been sitting for a while, like this one has, I never tighten up loose clearances, I only loosen up tight clearances. And the reason for that is from sitting, sometimes there can be buildup on the valve seats that keeps the valve from closing all the way. And once that gunk blows off, if you adjusted it, it'd be too tight. So I let the ones that are too loose go and try them again later after I've run the engine for a while. And ones that are too tight, we loosen up and make sure they have clearance. It's just a little clatter, it doesn't hurt anything. Valves are all set. Now let's take a look at the valve cover. Let's look inside. Yeah, you can see daylight through it. There are 4 wide open holes in this valve cover that let any dirt from outside go straight into the engine. That bothers me a little bit. Might be fine for a car on pavement, even then I wouldn't like it. But here in the sand and the dust, that's not going to fly. I can't use this valve cover. Now I'm noticing the valve cover that came with the truck does not have those holes in it. It's solid, and it has this breather on it with some kind of mesh filtery looking thing. There's a few dents here and there. I'll knock a little bit of those out and then we'll paint this thing up. Good enough. We'll hit it with some paint. I like the blue that the current valve cover is painted in, but I don't have any of it because it came painted that way. So I went digging through my leftover paint. Found this. It's hammered copper, leftover from the J10 project. Figure I already painted the block cast iron. We'll just go with an all-metal effect and do a copper valve cover. We'll see how it looks. Luckily, that spare engine came with a lot of parts like a new valve cover gasket. I didn't even have to buy this. The gasket fell apart when I took this breather off, so I don't have a gasket anymore. Now I do. Let's see how the copper paint looks on the cast iron paint. My mismatched spark plug wires are kind of bothering me a little bit, so I popped the 12 bucks for a new set. Won't work any better, but definitely looks better. I got more information. A friend of mine gave me the book on the 1.5-ton Chevy 4x4s of World War II. And in this, there's an entire chapter on the bomb service truck, which is the chassis this has. There's lots of good info here. And they were actually made particularly to be used in bomb depots. A couple interesting tidbits. Apparently, originally they were fitted with an 18-gallon tank under the cab, which I don't have. But then the range wasn't good enough, so they put another tank between the frame rails that was 30 gallons. And then they kept both those tanks and had a switch to pick which one you wanted. Now, I didn't know what that valve did before. Now, way up there, that's probably the fitting that used to go to the 18-gallon tank, which isn't there anymore, but probably got pulled out when the cab got swapped. If the valve was trying to suck some fuel from there, it would definitely cause a problem with this tank. Now, I know this one was bypassed before, so something was wrong, so I'm wondering if that valve is a problem. On the last video I mentioned I found blue on the grill when I expected to see olive drab. Now on this fender, you can see where the yellow is coming off. That is definitely olive drab paint underneath it. So I assumed the whole truck was olive drab before the yellow. But then you look a little closer. Now on this same fender right here, you can see it's distinctly blue. Underneath, that's olive drab. The one contract that was ever issued for these trucks was issued by the Air Force, and they painted their stuff blue. So my thought is the factory that produced these produced all the other trucks too for every branch of service. They probably painted everything that came out of their factory olive drab. Then when this contract of the M6 bomb service truck started getting fitted for the Air Force, they actually used the olive drab as a primer, repainted it blue, and then sent it to the Air Force. I have no idea if that's true, but it sounds kind of plausible to me. And it fits all the colors I have in this thing. If you don't think that's right, let me know what your theory is. Your guess is as good as mine, maybe better. And now the other interesting thing is all these M6s were made as an open cab for the visibility. They were worried people might run into bombs driving around the depot if they couldn't see where they were going. And that is a big problem. They never had a closed cab because that ruins the visibility. Now the visibility is not too bad going forward. When you turn to go back up, it leaves a little bit to be desired. If you turn the other way, there is a little window. Basically you can see sort of that way diagonal, but if you go to look this way, there's nothing there. There's a reason they added windows there for the 5-window cabs. Now the other issue with visibility is the mirrors. There aren't any. Now I was looking at pictures of these trucks to see what kind of mirror they use, and the one they use looks remarkably like a Willys Jeep mirror. And for Jeeps, you can get these things really cheap. I am going to adjust the angle slightly. Perfect. Now I can see a small spot behind me that only wobbles slightly. That'll be useful. This looked kind of like the original mirror mount, but it's a little bit floppy. I don't think that's going to be real easy to see through while I'm driving. On this side, I bent it a little bit further, bolted it straight to the hinge, and it's still floppy. Slightly less floppy, but I have a feeling I'm not going to be able to see behind me as I drive. Got my new glass cut. Now it looks like this frame is supposed to split apart in the middle so you can do one half and then the other. That is so rusted I couldn't get it apart. I just started tearing up the frame. So I'm going to try to spread it in the middle and slide it in, and hopefully the angle will let me slide both pieces in. Let's just open this frame up a little. Good thing metal bends easy. I wonder how strong glass is. Waiting for a big crack at some point. See if this helps. So close. Looks like I need to fit a screw in between these pieces of glass to connect the top and bottom. So I've got these plastic tools. Hopefully I can use those to make a gap. Feels like this glass is just a tiny bit bigger than my old one. And apparently that's all it takes. I think I might have it here. Seems to fit now. I just got to bolt it together. What I need to do now is squish the frame back together. I got one screw in. I've got to get that screw to line up. So that's got to go a 1/2 inch. Let's see what happens. Oops. Oh, that wasn't anything bad. Almost there. I may have a windshield here. Trim off these excess bolts. Hopefully not break it now. I think we're in business. Got another Jeep reproduction part. It's time I got to stop putting off this. I have not wanted to check the fluid in the transfer case. I checked the oil in the original engine, that was full of water. Oh, there's water. I checked the transmission, that was full of water. Nice clear water. The transfer case, well, might be full of water. It's time to find out what is in my transfer case. I'm hoping it's really just oil. Oh, it's really incredibly thick oil. Okay, well that's good. These hand pumps on gear oil are fantastic. And some of them have little nozzles that clip into the hole so you don't even have to hold the end. In with the good stuff. This might take a while. Just started to drip out. So in goes the plug. Onto the rear end. I didn't see any convenient drain plug on the bottom. I might be able to pop this bolt out and check if there's water, but seeing how the transfer case looked okay, I'm going to assume this thing hasn't been submerged and just check the level. Now there's a plug here, and there's a plug on this side. Both could be a level plug, but I'm going to go with this one because it has the most oil residue around it. Oh, I can feel oil. Doesn't look like a milkshake, so we'll just top it off. Now on to the front axle. This one's not a milkshake either, so that's good. We're just going to top it off because it is almost a finger length down. I'm well into my 2nd gallon of gear oil, still going. Now, laying under a vehicle, doing something boring like pumping gear oil into an axle, you have time to contemplate some of life's mysteries. For example, why is the nut in this U-bolt loose? The lock washer just spins around freely. That's not tight at all. I never would have looked for it otherwise, but that's kind of important. That had to move a pretty good amount before it tightened up. I hooked up the old voltage regulator and generator that came with this truck, and it didn't work. These are a pretty basic mechanical system, and they're pretty easy to diagnose and repair. So I'm going to take this opportunity to switch to an alternator, because I had this lying on my bench, and I know it works, and it puts out more power. Took a little bit of fiddling with the spacers. We've got the original generator bracket, piece of threaded rod through the whole thing, spacer, nut to hold this ear in, and then another nut onto the other piece of bracket with a spacer that looks suspiciously like an old 1/2-inch nut, and then another nut over there to clamp that side together. And the belt alignment is pretty good. This bracket is a little too far that way, but it bends easy. So there we go. It took me way too long to find a wire that was thick enough to charge, long enough to reach, and not too thick so it still fit inside this little plastic thing. I've kind of run out of daylight here. But I wanted to see this thing charge, so let's see if it works. We're currently looking at 12.5. 12.7, 6, 7. That's going the wrong way. Gonna rev it up a little. Oh yeah. That's charging. Too much. That's way too much. All right, we got another problem. Huh. Well, time to figure this one out. I figured out my problem. There's my connection to the voltage regulator. I never actually plugged it in. After I got done soldering it, I was letting it cool, never got back to it. All right. 13. Revving up. That's what we need to see. Now we have a charging system that works. I'm calling it quits for tonight. We'll see you tomorrow. This truck came with a speedometer in the dash, but it didn't take me too long to realize it wasn't going to work because there's no cable hooked to it whatsoever. I figured that gave it a pretty low probability of functioning. So I went looking for a cable. Cables for this truck are still available. There's still some stock out there. You can get a new old stock one. They're not cheap, and I didn't like that part. I also noticed the listing said that those were 97 inches long, and the ends were standard screw-on type. I found a universal speedometer cable, and this has the same ends. It's 100 inches long, and it was cheap. First thing I did was put the end in the speedometer, and then I spun the cable to see what the gauge read. The cable didn't turn. This speedometer is all jammed up. I went looking in my shed. I came across this speedometer, which I had bought in a set of Willys Jeep gauges. It's the right diameter, and it has the right end. Now here's the speedometer output on the transfer case. And I don't know if this actually works, but we'll find out. Alright, looks like I was supposed to go through this clip here. Looks like the nut's on straight, just the cable's off at an angle. But we'll call that a flex joint there. While I'm under here, I should probably take care of this whole open flywheel clutch issue. We'll put the cover back on. This should be better. Speedometer's all in now. And while I'm working on the dashboard, I bought a tiny little tachometer. So that can go right there. Now the reason I put a tachometer in here is this is a fully unsynchronized transmission. There are no synchros in any gear at all. And I'm not very good at shifting it. So I'm hoping the tachometer will help me match the revs a little better and get used to where I need to do my shift points. That doesn't quite look right for idle. Now this is the signal line where the tachometer determines what RPM you're doing, and that goes to the negative side of the coil. The negative side of the coil is switched by the distributor. and in this case, a set of points. Now I've never actually changed these. They're the ones that came with it, and they work fine. Now because this is a mechanical switch that's kind of bouncing around, it could be giving stray signals as it contacts, and the tachometer is picking up extra pulses. That tachometer is probably meant for a clean signal from an electronic source, not mechanical points bouncing around. We'll just button this back up. I'll deal with ignition another day. For now it works. Sometimes I have to work on stuff at odd hours. It's getting dark, but we got interior lights now. They may seem bright for interior lights, but I think of it more as a work light for working in the interior, because this thing needs a lot of work. So the last person to work on this actually brazed the floor in place because none of the bolts held. But I'm going to do something a little bit better here. This is a nut cert. Basically, it's a nut that acts like a pop rivet. You put in a hole and you squish it and it locks in place and leaves the nut in your sheet metal. And now we can just thread a regular 1/4-20 bolt in there. No need for a wrench on the backside. Grade 8 hardware is a little overkill, but it's all I have in the right length. So the floor is going to be really secure. Seems like a floor to me. And I can still check my brake fluid. That's handy, because I think this thing leaks. Oh, still got some. I bought a shift knob, the standard Ford AN tractor style one, which you can get for under $9, including shipping. So I got one for the shift lever. I also bought a couple more for the transfer case levers. My hands will be thanking me. This seat just isn't working for me. The first thing I noticed right away when I was putting it in has these big sides on it. You have to climb over them and between the steering wheel and get in here, which makes it a little hard to get in. And once you do, the seat is too low. But if I raise it up any, it'd be even harder to get in. So I don't like that. One thing I didn't notice until I tried to drive it was because of the sides, it pushes you towards the center of the vehicle, which means your legs are getting into the shift levers and stuff. I'll save it for another project. It looks good for a buggy, but we gotta try something different. Good thing I never actually bolted it in. I've got new seats for this that I haven't gotten around to installing. So I'm gonna steal the seat that does work, so I have to put the new ones in. Now this isn't half bad. I kind of like this. Now this fender is a little bit dented, so there's a little bit of a clearance issue between the end of the fender and the tire, so we're going to go ahead and take care of that. There we go. Took an awful lot to bend that. That's one sturdy fender brace. There, done. Now that I'm driving this truck on the road, there may come a point at some time where I need to have a discussion with someone out the window about the finer points of motor vehicle law and regulation. I probably don't want someone else's name on the door when I do that. So I'm going to go ahead and repaint this door, like in that brown color I did in the grill. I think that'll kind of work with the rust and stuff. That was easy. One other minor issue I had is these ratchets I use for door handles. They're still ratchets. If you do this, they don't always go back where you want them to be. Fixed. Now I was knocking the loose paint off this and it got really boring, so I started looking at this rust hole here, and I figured what happened was that water went in the window, went down, got trapped in the bottom, and rusted out the door from the inside. So I was thinking, make a square patch panel over all this, and then I'd have to drill some holes in the bottom to make sure all the water drained out and it didn't happen again. And then I realized my drain holes are already here. All I have to do is not fix them and I'm done. That's much easier. I think I'm going to go with the same brown I did on the grill. That almost blends into the rust completely. It's going to match beautiful. While I'm on a painting kick, there's one more thing I got to take care of. These are way too shiny. There, now that's better. Now I mentioned in the last video the steering was a little tough on this truck, and a lot of people said take off the dual wheels because that makes your steering harder. It definitely does make your steering harder. If you have a single wheel, it's just pivoting. If you have dual wheels, you're actually dragging one of them back and forth every time you steer. So the dual wheels make it way harder to steer. But I'm planning on driving this in sand, and these are skinny tires, so I have a feeling I'm going to need the dual wheels to float. Don't know for sure, we're going to have to try that out. But the other thing that affects the steering is the tire pressure. Now the valve stem on dual tires all point towards the center. So you need a special end so you can get a valve stem in either direction. So I took this, added a few fittings, gave myself a dial so I can check the pressure, air fitting to pump air in, ball valve to shut it off, and now I can check my tires properly. That one's under 20. That's one of the better ones. So I'm going to shoot for, let's say, 25, 30 PSI in these, and then it should steer a little better once they have air in them. Now, here's the window crank. This is the shaft for the interior door latch release, and I don't have a handle for this. It's a spline, though, and it looks familiar. It's the same thing modern cars use on their window cranks. So, we're just going to have two window crank handles. Just got to remember which one to use to get out. And of course, by modern, I mean 70s and 80s cars. There we go. We can open it from the inside now. Foster's, Australian for catch can. No matter what you think of the flavor, they're a perfect size for a radiator overflow bottle. Trying to get these radiator support braces to bolt on, it doesn't line up at all. And I think it's because this whole piece is zigzagged, and so it's effectively shorter and pulled that way. Found a piece of wood block, and then go down to the frame rail. There we go. Between straightening that one, then I had to lengthen that one a little bit, got these to bolt in. So now, we're all secure. This bit of hood is folded in, and I can't get the latch anywhere near that. So, see if I can bend this out a little bit. There we go, fits perfect. Now one indicator of the quality of bodywork is the panel gap. You want to make sure they're fairly even. In this case, the gap of the hood is about the same as the gap in the hood. My all-terrain tires there. I haven't got around to grooving these tires yet. I don't know if it actually makes much of a difference, so let's do a scientific test to see which one has more traction. I like the brown on the door. That goes nicely with the rust. But now it's kind of boring, so we gotta do something else. Maybe it's centered. As soon as I stood back, I realized I had this logo tilted way too far this way. And really, there's only one solution for that. I need to find a hill steep enough that the logo goes level. So now we gotta take it off-roading. care about really, because that's where I'm going to be driving this thing. Certainly don't want to drive it on the road much. That's only a if I have to type thing. And you can see this truck isn't sinking down very much at all. And this is not solid ground here. This is all real loose stuff. The grooves are actually catching the sand pretty nicely. I think this setup is actually going to work decently in this surface. This is pretty deep sand we're going through. Temperature's looking pretty good. Oil pressure's fine. Tachometer says we're doing about 7 grams. I don't quite believe that. Speedometer is not working at all. I believe that. Alright, let's go to second. Oh yeah, we're cruising now. One, you don't want your thumbs in the wheel. Those tires have a little bit of kick to them. I see a hill that looks good for testing. Traction is good. I don't even think I spun a tire on that one. Now the curl ratio of this thing is pretty good. You have the axles, which are incredibly low geared, and then you have the transfer case, which doubles that. And then you have the transmission, which has a nice low first gear too. Gives you a good creeping along, check out the scenery speed. Temperature's holding steady, even creeping along. Gonna try taking off from a standing start on sand. the steepest hill I found in this area. Didn't quite line up the logos, so I'm gonna have to do some more exploring. But I've been out here in the desert for about an hour now. The thing has done better than I expected. It's really done great. Temperature stayed right at 170, touched 180 a couple times on hills, but right back to 170. So can't complain about the cooling. Oil pressure is running around 20, a little under idle. That's fine for hot. I actually went through sand better than I expected. It's certainly no Jeep. It's not sporty, but if you want to just plod along, it's kind of like having your covered wagon being pulled by oxen. You're just going to plod along, but you're going to get there. I was really surprised at some of those hills. It just kept chugging and chugging and chugging. I didn't actually get stuck at all. I just went wherever I wanted to. It spun for a while, but it kept going just a little at a time. It's tremendously stable. With those extra wheels all the way around, I could go on side hills. Didn't feel at all like I was tipping. This is pretty much exactly what I was looking for. Running a little low on brake fluid. I think I have a leak there. So at this point, the pedal is pretty low. Might have my wife bring me some before I drive home on the road, but it's fine for off-road use. So that's it for today. Hope you guys are having fun too, and we'll see you next time. People have been doing a lot of dumping out here. I'm going to pick up a load of trash before I go, and at least haul some of it out of here. Now, I've never had a problem with any of the Nylite products before, but this bomb light stopped working. Now, they say they have a 2-year warranty. I sent them a screenshot of my proof of purchase and a picture of the light that didn't work via email beginning of the week. And on Saturday, I got my replacement, no charge at all. That's pretty good customer service. I'm still happy with them.